When we think about a massive global religious movement, our minds usually jump to the charismatic founder, right? The person on stage. But have you ever stopped to think about the person behind the scenes? The architect who actually builds the entire empire? Well, today we're diving into the story of Hi Pak, a man who was absolutely indispensable to one of the 20th century's most fascinating and controversial religious leaders. So, who was this guy really? Was he a visionary, a pillar of faith who was building a global movement for peace? Or was he the master enabler of a controversial and incredibly powerful organization? That's the core question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're going to explore. Okay, so to even start to unpack that, you've got to understand the role he played alongside Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church. And look, he wasn't just some assistant or a follower, he was way more than that. He was both the voice and the architect. I mean, just think about the sheer scope of what he did. He wasn't just an interpreter translating from Korean to English. No. He was the voice that shaped Moon's message for the entire Western world. He was the strategist, meticulously planning the movement's expansion. He was the implementer, the one who actually built all these organizations from the ground up. And maybe most importantly, he was an unshakably, fiercely loyal follower. He was, in a word, indispensable. Which probably has you wondering, right? How in the world does a highly decorated military officer get to a point like this? It's a huge leap. Well, his journey from soldier to disciple is a fascinating one, and it really began long before he ever crossed paths with Reverend Moon. So let's rewind. Puck's story starts in what is now North Korea, in a deeply religious Presbyterian family. His entire early life was forged in conflict. He lived through the Japanese occupation and then served as an intelligence officer in the absolutely brutal Korean War. This was not a man who was a stranger to hardship. He was a distinguished soldier, a top cadet in his class, and he was on a serious fast track, eventually landing this prestigious post as a military attaché right in Washington, D.C. And it was right there, in D.C. of all places, that something happened in 1961 that would just completely pivot his entire life. A single encounter that changed everything. At first, it was just another assignment for him. He was tasked with assisting a visiting religious leader from Korea named Sun Myung Moon. But over a series of really intense meetings, his professional skepticism it melted away. He began to see Moon as more than just a preacher. He saw a man with this incredible, universal vision for peace that went way beyond politics or religion. It was a total paradigm shift for him. And that realization, it led to a decision that must have looked absolutely insane to everyone around him. Hi Pak, a decorated colonel with a golden career path laid out in front of him, resigned his commission. He just walked away from it all. He threw away a lifetime of work to dedicate himself fully to what he now believed was a mission from God. So what is that kind of all-in dedication actually built? Well, he went on to become the chief architect of a truly global machine of influence. Under his guidance, this incredibly diverse, almost wild network of organizations started to spring up. And I'm talking about a huge range of things. A world-famous children's ballet, a major newspaper in Washington, powerful anti-communist political groups, the list goes on and on. Let's just zoom in on a few of the big ones. Okay, so take the Little Angels, which he founded way back in 1962. This is a perfect example of his strategy. On the surface, it's this beautiful, celebrated, and kind of innocent children's folk ballet. But underneath, it was an absolutely brilliant tool for soft diplomacy, building goodwill and opening doors for South Korea and the Unification Church all over the planet. But then, you've got maybe his most ambitious move of all, founding the Washington Times in 1982. This was a whole different ballgame. The goal here was to plant a powerful, conservative media voice right in the heart of the U.S. Capitol, specifically to challenge what they saw as a liberal bias in the media. This was a massive, expensive project aimed at directly shaping American politics. And he didn't just stop at culture and media. He jumped right onto the ideological chessboard of the Cold War. He led this group called Causa International, which was all about promoting Moon's philosophy as the ultimate spiritual answer to communism. And this wasn't just talk. It was about building a global network and forging real alliances with powerful political and religious leaders. Now, as you can probably guess, you don't build an empire like this without making some serious waves. This incredibly rapid rise was surrounded by, well, a hurricane of intense controversy. And we're talking about really serious stuff. Accusations were flying left and right. People started calling the Unification Church a cult, throwing around words like brainwashing and deceptive recruitment. Critics constantly demanded to know where the movement's vast sums of money were coming from. And who was the public face, the man standing in the center of that storm, taking all the heat? You guessed it, Hi Pak. He became the central figure in a couple of huge public battles. When Reverend Moon was imprisoned for tax evasion, Pak was out there day and night, relentlessly defending him, framing it all as religious persecution. And he himself got investigated during the Koreagate scandal in the 1970s, though it's important to note he was never actually charged with any wrongdoing. But here's the thing, and this is maybe the key to understanding the man. Through all of it, the scandals, the accusations, the media attacks, his loyalty to Reverend Moon was just absolute. It was legendary. For him, this wasn't about bad PR. He saw it as a spiritual war, and he never, ever wavered. So after a lifetime of that kind of unwavering, controversial, all-in dedication, what's his legacy? How do we remember a figure like Hi Pak today? It brings us right back to where we started, to those two sides of the coin. It really, truly depends on who you ask. To followers, he's a visionary, a diplomatic genius, an unshakable pillar of their faith. But to critics, he's the key enabler, a master of PR and influence who blurred the lines between genuine conviction and a raw, powerful ambition. And, he made sure he got the final say. He wrote this massive 2-volume memoir to ensure that his version of the story, his perspective on this incredible journey, was cemented into the historical record. It was, in a way, his final definitive act of loyalty. And really, that leaves us with a much broader question, one that goes way beyond just one man or one movement. It's this: how does one person's absolute, unshakable conviction, for better or for worse, truly have the power to change the world?